All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of web development. Let's see. We have been discussing and building web applications, and that the course is split up in two halves. The first half, we are discussing the client side of a client-server application, and then in the second half of the semester, we'll talk about the server. For the last several weeks, we've been discussing how to build this client application that basically implements a user interface that interacts with a human user so that humans can read content and then interact with the user interface by clicking and dragging and typing and filling out forms. So we've been first we discussed HTML, right? How to build and lay out simple user interfaces using format such as tables and lists and headings, paragraphs, and form elements, right? And it didn't look very nice, right? It's not the default look and feel of HTML is not very appealing. So we discussed CSS, right, as a programming language to style the content and make it look a little more presentable, right? And so we discussed some of the basics of styling web pages, just changing uh, uh, font color and foreground color, background color, being able to lay out things horizontally, vertically, and things like that. So we learned quite a bit about CSS, but it's not very easy to make things look pretty and professional. You really need a kind of different set of skills to make things look very appealing. So it's often the case that as developers, we are giving maybe a Photoshop or some PowerPoint slides or some PDF that has some very spectacular user interface that we are then called to make it real, right? Using the technology, JavaScript, HTML, React.js, and whatnot. And then we have to know enough CSS and HTML and JavaScript to make sure that we can actually build those very beautiful user interfaces. So yeah, but it's often the case that we don't, we wouldn't use CSS to make things look uh, professional from scratch, since it's not trivial. Although unless if you use libraries such as Bootstrap or some library that has already been predefined, that has already a set of styles and widgets that are predefined, that have a specific layout and a specific set of classes that you can apply, then we can perhaps try to make things look at least professional, finished, polished, maybe not beautiful, right, spectacular, but something that is presentable. And in particular, if we're working and implementing applications, right, where you need some set of very specific widgets that you need to interact with, that users interact with, and form elements. So today we're going to introduce a library called Bootstrap that is going to allow us to make things look, professional, especially for developers. We'll see that that has a library of widgets that are targeted for implementing user interfaces, for online applications. So yeah, so that's the plan for this lecture. And also the second quiz should be available. You should be able to work on it, anytime this week, and it'll be a mixture of HTML and CSS questions. And also, we started talking about assignment 2 last week, right? We went through implementing several lab exercises. So today we're going to keep doing that. We're going to wrap that up, finish up some of the exercises, get started on the Kanbas implementation, right? Applying CSS and Bootstrap to our Canvas application to make sure that it looks more like the target screenshots. Okay, so that's the plan for this lecture. Any questions? Also, if you're interested at the end of the lecture, I'm going to stay afterwards if you have any questions or need help with your assignment or project or anything like that. You're welcome to stay. All right, let's get started. I believe we left off with having implemented the some of these exercises that we learned about styling, simple things such as the foreground color, background color, right? And then we started talking about positions and sizing, and how we can make things a particular size, overriding it, and also starting to position things relative, right? And then being able to um, also style it in an absolute position, either from the top left corner of the screen or then fixed at a particular place, right? And then we saw that once you start playing around with these positions, it's very often that you start causing things to overlap, right? And that might be intentional or not. We have to make sure that it is what we intended. And once you start overlapping things, this introduces an additional dimension, right? Not only X and Y, but now Z, right? A new axis coming out of the the screen, and you can determine and configure, right, which DOM element gets rendered on top of which, right? So anyway, so we went through all these exercises. So let's continue. And there's a few more that we have to get through before we start discussing Bootstrap. So let's talk about grid layout. So a very common way that we want to lay out things on the screen is in a grid, right? And we saw some examples of this when we were building the Kanbas application, where it's very common that we want to lay out a web application into using a grid system. Right? So, for instance, you see grids everywhere whenever you're going through web applications, where you might have either a column that has many boxes, right, stacked up, or some a whole bunch of courses laid out in a grid, or this may consider maybe one column that has one row that has 1, 2, 3 columns. Right, so it's a very common way of laying out content. Also, for instance, if you go into a particular course, this can be considered also a grid where we have the main content in the center, and then we have a couple of sidebars on either end. And so this might be implemented maybe as a single row that has several columns. And indeed, that's basically what the strategy that we took in the first assignment, right? That we declared several tables with rows and columns, right, to achieve this kind of layout. So we're going to revisit alternative ways of doing the same thing, right? So for instance, in the so let's explore how would we perhaps implement a few of these, right? Either 2 columns laid out side by side, half and half, or maybe also side by side, in a row that has 2 columns, where it's laid out and a third on the left and then 2/3 on the right. That's also very common. Or maybe like a main content and 2 sidebars on either end. So one way to achieve that, right, is to use float. The float property. Float is a property that allows you to define that a certain piece of content is either going to be stuck to the right or to the left, and then everything else, all the other text tends to just flow around it. So let me illustrate this, with an example. So, for instance, let's close this here, and for the for lab 2, let's open up a component that we can play around with float. So, for instance, let's do export default float, return h1 float. Oop, there we go. There we go. And let's bring this into the second lab. So lab 2 right here, and let's bring it at the end here. float, like that, right? And so let's see right here, lab 2. So this float, right? So let's create a few paragraphs just to show you what the effect of float is. Right, so if you go into float and you create several paragraphs, so let's create one paragraph here. Let's have a really long paragraph. This is one paragraph. Let's make it a little longer. There we go. So this one paragraph, one long paragraph. And let's copy this paragraph a couple of times. But we have several paragraphs, like, if you just were reading through a long book. So the original intent of float was to be able to intermix some images, inside of paragraphs, and that one common way of laying out images in a book is that the images appear at the beginning of a paragraph, right, and then the rest of the content just floats around or just wraps around the image. So let me show you. We already have an image, I believe, in public and images. So we have the Tesla bot, we have React.js. So let's bring in this React.js example. Right. So for instance, let's bring the image here. So image source images, and then React.js.jpg. It's a little bit too big, so let me make it a little smaller. So maybe 100, maybe too small. 150, say. Okay, we have a React, and then you have an image maybe between the paragraphs, right? So between the paragraphs, there's a few images like that. Okay. But also the image might appear right in the middle of the paragraph, maybe say over here, or right after this period, like that. So there's it. So this React over here is this image right there, right? And notice that as I resize the content, notice that these images, right, are not affected by the resize, because they appear before and after the paragraph. Whereas this image, right, is in line with the text. So images by default are in line, right? So they flow with the rest of the content. Okay. Now let me show you what happens if you apply the float property. So for instance, if we apply here style, and you say float, and then left, notice what happens to the image. See that? The image now is stuck on the left side of the screen, and then the text is just flowing around it. See that? Right. So let's apply now to the second one over here, which is also like in the middle of the text. Right. So let's do the same thing. We say style, and then we apply float, and then right. You notice that it's now stuck on the right-hand side, and the text just flows around it, and now it's impervious to the resizing of the screen. It's always stuck to that right-hand side or the left-hand. This is stuck to the left, and it was stuck to the right. Okay, everybody good? All right. Now let me do that again with this one over here. Again, left. Let me just copy here, style, float left. Okay, there it is. So it's working as expected, right? But somebody realized that if you do this several times, so say I copy the images a couple of times, so there it is. I copy it, another one, right, and then again. Okay, notice what happens, right? So these are one after another, and so they're behaving as if they were stacked, right, one after another, right, and stuck to the left-hand side, almost as if this were a row, right, and then several columns. See that? It's behaving almost like that. Now, so somebody took this idea and said, "Oh, wait a minute! If these guys, right, these three over here, weren't just widths 150, that I could make the width somehow take up the entire width of the screen. I could break up the whole screen, right, the whole width of the screen. I could break it up logically into several columns, right? So, for instance, I might say that the left-hand side here is maybe 20%, 20% here, and then the one on the left on the bottom is also 20%. So that would leave me what, 20, 20, that's 40. So this would be leaving 60%. Notice that basically I've broken up the content, right, so that it takes up the entire width of the screen, 20%, 80, and 20%, right? And then perhaps I could make the widths always the same, right, so that I don't have this weird effect here of floating around, right? So I can say, the height, make them all the same, maybe 300. I can make them all the same height. Oops, put it in the wrong place. There we go. And then 300 over here. Notice that I could break up the whole width of the screen into these logical, columns, right? That allows me to define however I want, what portions how I want to break up the by percentages. Okay, so somebody took this idea and says, oh, wait a minute, I could do the same thing with paragraphs. So for instance, these last paragraphs down below, these last paragraphs that I have here, let's see, we have these 3 paragraphs. I can do the same thing. I can apply that same idea to these last 3 paragraphs. I can say, let's see, we have 1, 2, 3, right? Let's style this. Maybe give them separate colors so we can see them, what they do. Let's see, we could say, background color yellow, style. Oh, let me spell that correctly. Style. So make that yellow. Make this other paragraph blue, right? And maybe the foreground white, right? And then this last one, background red. Okay. So if now we apply the float, say I want to have this float, so float this left, okay, and the width, I could say maybe 25% or 20%, right? And then I can apply the same float, right, to the second one and say that I want this to be 80, right? And this last one at the bottom, last one over here, right, also 20, right? Right, so it didn't quite work as expected. Now notice that the reason is that this React over here is also floating and is behaving like the text that it wants to. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know how to add. This is 60. This would be 60. That's why it didn't work. There we go. Also notice that this React over here is kind of behaving funny, right? Is that it wants to also wrap around, right? And that's because originally I had started floating the stuff above me, and the floating behavior continues even beyond after the declaration. So this one is also having the float applied to it. So we can clear and say, hey, I know I defined the floating before, but I want to start and end and create ranges, right, or particular areas where the float applies, but then it doesn't apply anymore later, right? So we can turn off the float, right? We can say style, clear both. Let's see. Where's the image? Wait a minute. Image, clear both. Well, I don't know. Turn that off for a second. Okay, there it is. So notice that now I've basically taken those 3 paragraphs, right? Taking those 3 paragraphs that originally were behaving like blocks, right? Where they were rendering vertically, right? And they were being stacked vertically, right? And I was able to change their layout to be horizontal, right? And define maybe 2 sidebars on each side, right? And then the main content in the middle, right? So this kind of gives us an alternative way of laying out things horizontally, right? We could now perhaps go back to our Kanbas implementation. If you remember, the way we laid this out horizontally is that we created tables, right? And this is a row that has 2 columns. And then inside of the account, again, this is a table that has 1 row and then 2 columns. And we had discussed the fact that this was a bad practice, right? That we should not be using tables, right, for laying out content horizontally. So we're going to revisit this implementation, right, and use alternatives, such as, for instance, we could use float, right, like we did here, right, or we'll see even better solutions. So in this assignment, right, in this presentation, here's an example of using float, right, to create, for instance, layouts that looks like this, where you have 3 divs that normally would render vertically. Now we can render it horizontally. Okay, and then here's just a few examples on how to lay out a few other ways of either side by side, 50-50 on either side, or a 33%, 67%, like a third, 2/3 layout. All right, so let me illustrate that real quick. For instance, let's create a new grid layout component over here. Say grid layout, and let's do export default function grid layout. And so let's do a return here. Okay, and then load that up into the lab2. So grid layout, there we go. So there it is. So right at first, right, you have just 2 divs, just 2 normal divs, right? Because that's all they are, right? You have the grid layout over here. We have the outer div over here, right? That contains 2 divs, right? The left half and then the second half, the right half, right? So we wanted to render left and right side by side, but right now they're not. Okay. So what we can do is that we can define a container that will play the role of the row, right? And then another set of classes, right, that will define the widths of each one to 50%, right, and then float them left. Okay, and so let's do that. Let's grab that and apply that to the I think the style, right? Oh, this one, index CSS, right? So let's paste that in. So notice that it changes the layout to be side by side 50-50. Okay, so notice what's doing over here. So notice that it declares an outer div, right, that sets it configures the property clear to be both, meaning I'm defining a parent element that starts off with no floats, right? We're clearing out the floats. We don't want any floats. That means we don't want any float that happens inside of our elements, right? This element here, right? This parent element, this outer div. I notice it's WD grid row, which says that it's clear both. That means that any flow that happens inside of this element, we don't want that effect, to spill over, right, to any other elements that they don't want to be floated. Right? So we only want the floating to happen inside of this defined area, and in there, right, notice we're applying column half page to both, and you want to be they're going to be 50%, so that's going to be 50-50 each one, 50% width, right? And then both of them are going to be floated left, so they're going to stack, right? And because they stack, and because their width totals 100%, right? They're taking up the entire width of the screen, right? All right. Now let's look at another example. So this one is a third and 2/3. Right? So let's put it here. There. So we have a 1/3 and 2/3. Now, right now it doesn't, right? Because they're just plain old divs, right? So there's a div and here's another div, and they render vertically like they normally would. Notice that there's an outer grid row, which is going to declare clear both. So any float that happens in here will not spill over across to anyone else. So only it's affected the inner divs here. And so notice that this one is going to set the column 1/3, column 2/3. So probably it's going to be 33%, right? And it's going to be the remainder 67%, right? Plus they're going to stack to the left, so we're going to float them both to the left, right? So the CSS is right here. We're going to grab that, and we're going to create these classes, right, in the CSS. So we're going to paste that. So there it is. So notice it's 1/3 on the left and 2/3 on the right. Okay. Okay, one more. So this one's going to be declare a a main content in the center, right? And then on either side we're going to have two sidebars. Right? So let's do that here. So at first, again, it's just 3 divs, right? That that just want to render. They want to stack vertically, right? So we have this left sidebar, we have the main content, and then we have the sidebar on the right, right? So this sidebar here. But right now, they're just plain divs. So let's declare these classes, right, in the CSS. It's this one. So basically, it's declaring the sidebars to be 20% each, right? And then the remainder 60, and then they all floated left. Make sense? All right. So yeah, so this is one way to achieve, an alternative. It is an alternative way of achieving, layout in a grid. All right. Now, okay, so let's talk about Flex. So Flex is it's a formal, right, set of classes that are targeted towards being able to lay out things in grids, right, in rows and columns. So unlike using float is really kind of like a hack, right, because it was not really intended for layout, although certainly we can use it, it's fine, right? But it was mostly for images and want to be able things to float around or flow around the element, right? Just text flowing around an image, for instance, right? But Flex is was designed specifically, right, for being able to control how things either render vertically or horizontally, right, and have a lot of control over the spacing and whether it's justified to the right or to the left, right, or what spacing in between and things like that. So let's take this example, right, where we are defining just a simple div, and so let's just a simple div, and let's create a component where we can play around with this. So let's do flex here. And so let's do export the for function flex, right? And then we'll bring that into lab 2, flex. Like a type today. Although flex is, it's not returning anything. So let's do return. There we go. We have flex right here. Okay. So yeah, yeah. So let's take a look at this. So here we have a container, flex container, and right now it's just what? It's just a whole bunch of just boxes. It's the first is just a div with a box 1. There it is. It's this one. And this is just box 2, and then a break, right? So box 2 and box 2. Then we have box 3, blah blah blah, 3 times, maybe another 1. That okay. So they're not very interesting. It's just a whole bunch of divs. So let's give a couple of colors. So let's copy this style, right, in CSS, and let's go over it. Okay, so notice that it just renders as divs. They're stacked, right? And we're just it's not styling anything new, right? It's just setting the borders, the black, the style. So it's this outer border the container. And then we have a flex box, right? And this is being applied to each one of them, flex box, right? And that just sets the border to be 5 pixels gray and solid, and then some margins of 10. So there's a 10 margin around like that, right? That pushes off from everything else around us. Then each box has a different color, right? Yellow, blue, and red. So that's box 1, 2, and 3. So it's yellow, blue, and red. Okay, so nothing new, right? So we're not learning anything new here. So, but let's take a look at the starting to play with Flex itself. Really Flex classes. So the only thing we're going to do is that we're going to change the display property of the container, right? Only the display property of the container. So what does that do? So take a look at this, right? What happens when we make a change, right, in the container to be Flex? I'm going to save that. See that what happens? The divs all of a sudden, right, went from being block elements, right, to kind of like being like inline elements, behaving like inlines, right? So let me show you again, right? So if I comment that out, these are regular divs, and like all divs, they want to be as wide as their parent allows them to be. So they're as wide as their parent. Okay, they're all like that. Also, the height is given by the content, right? So here I only need 1 line, so that's how high I am. And then this one needs to be 2 lines, that's how high I am. And this needs to be 3 lines, and that's how high this div is. Make sense? So that's the typical block element behavior, or how it is laid out. Now, when you turn on Flex, right? Look what happens, right? So now it's kind of inverted. Notice that the width is no longer as wide as the parent. Instead, it's as narrow as the content tells it to be, right? So I only need the space to fit box 1. That's how wide I am. And here I need the space to fit box 2. So that's how wide this one is. And this one needs to be as wide as box 3, the text. Yeah. But notice that the height, it is as tall as the parent, and the parent is that tall. Now, why is the parent that tall? Well, the parent is as tall as its children. Right? So really, the one who's determining the height of the whole thing is this over here, the red one, right? Because it wants to be as high as 3 elements, as 3 rows. That's how high it is, and it causes all the other ones to be also the same height. So I am as high as my children say, and then that forces all the other ones to be my height, right? I am the tallest one, so everybody has to be my height. Right? So that is what Flex buys you, right? By default, this is block, like that. That is the default display value, right? So notice that I don't need to add it because that is the default, right? But I can override it to be Flex, right? Everybody good? Also, notice another thing: these are justified to the left. So this is, here stuck on the left, right, and they stack up from there towards the right. So they're behaving much like inline elements, right? So as things are flowing from left to right, from top to bottom, right, and so very much like inline elements, right? Notice that if I make it too short and it doesn't fit, notice that it still doesn't wrap, even though, right, I don't have enough space. Look what happens, right? It starts to crunch the content inside to try and fit all the 3 columns. Okay, all right. So let's play around with some more. Let's now in the container we can also turn on the how to justify. Right now they're all justified to the left. See that? They're all here on the left. But we can override that by using justify content, and we can say center, right? So let's put a center here, like that. So notice that it's no longer on the left side, but instead it's in the center, right? Or you can also say end. You can make it so that it goes all the way to the end. By default, it's start. It's stuck to the beginning over here. Notice that it's not left. It's not left, right? And it's not right. Okay, although it is supported. The preferred notation here is that you use these other tokens, right, that are not specific to right or left, because depending on the culture that you are targeting, the end might be the left, right, and the start might be the right. Okay, because for us, the start is the left, because we here in the U.S., right, we read from left to right, so the beginning is the left hand side. But in other cultures, they read from the right to the left, right, and so the start might be the other way around, and that is automatically configured in the browser. So the browser will know what does end mean, whether end means left or right, right, and the browser will know and then justify accordingly. But if you use specifically right and left, then the browser is just going to use right and left, right, regardless, right, of what culture. But this one, end and start, allows it to automatically choose whether it's right or left based on wherever geographic area the browser is being rendered. Okay. So yeah, so that's end. You can also justify not left, not right, not center, right, but you can set the space around, right? So notice all the options. See, there's a whole bunch of options where you can say, right, left, start, end, right? But you can say, space around, that, so it's going to distribute all the space that is remaining, around, equally around across each one. So for instance, this space right here, right, is the same space between here and here, right? And then it's the same space between here and here, right? And there's a few other ones. So space around, space between, right? Notice that it puts the other ends, right, the left one and the right one, right, stuck to the right-hand side, and then the remaining space is all only around the one that's the center. There's quite a few, right? So to play around with them, become familiar with what you can do, right? There's also space evenly. Space evenly. So this is so evenly, so that the space in between, right, is always the same, right? So this space is the same as this space, the same as this space, and so on and so forth, right? You can also set how you want it to be aligned vertically, right? So this justify content is only for horizontal justification, but you can also configure how do you want to be vertically, right? So if I save that, notice that the height by default wants to be as high as its parent, but alignment is vertical alignment, whereas justification is horizontal alignment, right? Okay. So anyway, so there's quite a few. You can also center it. You can do center as well, right? So they're all center aligned here in the middle of the parent, right? And you have you can also say that you can change not by controlling the container, but also each one of the boxes individually, right? So for instance, we can say that the flex box inside of the container, without these guys, right, allows them to stretch 100% of so that they're all equal and 100%. Okay, notice that regardless of what the content is, right? And you can do them individually. So instead of just flex box, you can target individual ones, right? Flexbox 1, Flexbox 2, Flexbox 3, and make them 20, 60, and 20, right? To kind of provide this layout over here. Okay. So anyway, here's an example of using this idea, but for laying out things like what we need to do in the canvas, where we need to lay out either the course. Either this, where we have the left-hand side sidebars, and then something that stretches and takes up the entire width of the screen, right? Same thing inside of the account, where we want to maybe use flex, where we have two columns, right, side by side, right, and the one on the right just stretches, takes up the entire width of the screen. So here's an example on doing that, right? So here, let's copy that, right, and paste that in the bottom here like that. Let's go back to the labs, lab 2. So here we have three columns. So they're not columns yet, right? They're just divs, simple divs. That we have the flex row container, and then these are three columns. One is going to be yellow, blue, and red, already colored, but we're going to add some classes that are going to change that to be flex, right? So for instance, let's change the container to be display flex, right? And you can set the direction, either row or column, right? So let's go into CSS, right? And there it is. So now it's rendering from left to right, okay, as a row. And then we can start overriding a few things. We can say that last column, this third one, perhaps is the main content. These are the two sidebars. This is the main content. And we want it to grow, right, as far as it can go, right? So for instance, this last one, we can add flex grow 1 and then define it to say that, to mean that it should grow, based on the actual content. There it is. It takes up the entire width of the screen, the remaining width of the screen, right? So that the other two don't move, right? They don't resize, but this last one takes up the remaining width of the screen, right? And then, but some of them some columns we might need to specifically say what width we need. So for instance, we might need the particular sidebar, maybe the course, the course navigator to be a specific size, right? So we might set a specific width of 75, right? And define it. Here we're going to define it to be 75, so that you can be specific about a specific column. There it is. So notice that this is 75, right? And the other two, still, this column 1 is as narrow as the content. This one is as wide as, specific to 75 pixels, whereas this one is as wide as the remaining width of the screen, right? So you have pretty much quite a bit of control over how the widths are set up, using Flex. And so this is going to be the strategy that we're going to be using forward, going forward to style our content. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at decorating with icons. Right? It's very common that when you're building web applications, right, that you find a lot of imagery, right, a lot of small little images that give you a clue, right, very quick at a glance, exactly what they mean, right? This document, the dots over here, the lists, right, the justification. So these are all icons, right, that typically come from a library, right? And so we would like to be able to have our own icons. And there's quite a few libraries of icons. We're going to be using this one, the React icons. Right? So let me install that real quick. Stop, install it. And we can visit them real quick. So what they are, so React icons. So React icons is an open source library of multiple, it's a open source library that contains many libraries, right? It certainly contains the icons from Bootstrap, from hero icons, from Font Awesome is here, Font Awesome 5, 6, right? And these are all open source. You can use them without paying any royalties. And so whenever you are building something, right, you might want to look for something. So for instance, if you're looking for bold or the letter A, or italic, or printer, right? You can look them up in React icons. So we say printer, and there's a whole bunch of icons for printers, right? Or we might need a picture. You make look for picture. So there's a lot of icons for pictures that you can use. Also, there's a lot of branding from all the main companies are represented. So Apple is here. So you have the Apple, you have Amazon, logos are there, Twitter or X or whatever. There it is. So the icons on there, Facebook. So anyway, so a lot of the most common brands are there. Also the the various icons that you might need to actually implement an application, right? So anyway, so we're going to be using this this library, and the way you use it is, if you click on it, it'll show you how you use it. You need to import a React component. So they're all implemented, wrapped inside of React components that you're going to import and then use them as just a regular tag, right? And then you can further configure them and style them. You can change the size, you can rotate them, you can change the foreground color, right? You can apply just plain old CSS or classes, right, to further style them to make them look exactly how you want them, right? The exercises in the assignment do go over some examples. So, for instance, here's an example that you can use to become familiar with this. So, for instance, let's in Lab 2, let's create a React icons component. So, export default React icons, return. Oops, let's close that. And I guess I didn't copy the content. Let's paste that in. And let's see. Oops. There we go. So basically, I've imported a few icons, right? 3 from React Icons Font Awesome, right? Here's another one, and then just use them and use some of the Bootstrap classes, right, to change the font size to be a little bigger, like a header 3, right? I can change the text. I'm using Flex. There's another Bootstrap class, right, that we're going to be using soon. That configures things to be render from left to right, right? And so if we include that in the lab 2, this React icon. So this is React icon sampler. There it is. So there's our 3 icons. Okay. So we're going to be using them to implement various parts of the Kanbas application, right? These icons over here, right? Also everywhere there's icons, like this button, these drop downs, these pluses, right? So all these icons, right? We're going to use React icons to implement them. Okay. All right. Okay. So let's take a look at Bootstrap. So Bootstrap is a library, right, that allows us to implement some behaviors, right, that would be very time consuming to do it from scratch. So it's a library that defines quite a bit of widgets that are very common in when you're building applications. Like for instance, they have a lot of components, like all sorts of buttons that you can style them to look in a particular way. They have its own color scheme, and it uses adds nice rounded corners, right? And also defines a lot of widgets that allow you to display images that you can display a lot of content really very quick. And building this from scratch would be very time consuming. So if somebody already built it, why would you do this again? There's also accordions, for instance, right? So if you have a lot of content, you can split them up into multiple sections, right? And then you can have the user navigate through this content. It provides navigational bars, for implementing these kind of menus at the top. They're just stuck, right? That gives you hyperlinks and search bars and drop downs and things like that, right? So that it gives you code snippets that you can just copy, right? And we'll implement something like that, with a drop down, an input field, a button, right, and links. So again, it looks pretty nice, pretty cool, pretty clean, So instead of you reinventing this from scratch, right? This is a good place to start. You can always override the look and feel, right? Maybe you don't like the corner, right? You don't like the color, their color scheme. Then you can override all that so that it's more customized to you, right? There's modal windows, right? That you can pop up, right? That you click a button, right, and it appears, it navigates, and you can dismiss it, things like that. So again, why would you do this from scratch? Um, there's navigational links, there's tabs, there's like tabs, so that shows you the one that is currently selected. There's pills, so you can click and select something else. Yeah, another one that we're going to use today, for instance, using cards. Cards allows you to lay out content from either in a grid, right, or side by side, or just a card with images and call out, right, plus buttons that allow you to interact and navigate somewhere. So I'm going to be using this, for instance, to implement the dashboard, right? So the dashboard is basically a whole bunch of cards, right? That you click on a card and then it navigates into that specific course, right? So we'll use that, and they can be configured to be just 2 columns or 3 columns, right? You can specify how wide you want it and whatnot. Okay, so that's one very important use of libraries such as this. And in particular, this library is targeted for developers like us, right? It has tons of widgets that are useful. Another one that we're going to use today also quite a bit is lists, right? So we're going to use just, you can style just regular lists, right? That would normally be rendered as just bullets, right? So it adds this nice, this nice rendering where you have the outer is rounded corners, you have lines in between, so it's much nicer, right? Definitely much more presentable. You can highlight a particular item in the list, and there's quite a few other ways of rendering. You can style them different colors, you can add badges, you can style them in different colors to highlight. And another one that we're going to be using today is tables. Where are the tables? Why are the tables not listed here? Really? Tables? Tables. There we go. So tables, you have a regular table, but when you add the class table, it looks so much nicer. Adds lines between the rows, right? The styling of the headings is much nicer. You can highlight individual cells, and you can also put them striped so that they highlight every other row. And also responsive tables where it allows you to have content, columns that if they are too small, right, if it doesn't fit, right? Actually, no, let's get out of here. If the table doesn't fit, right? So normally tables, if they don't fit, they add a scroll bar for the entire width of the screen, and that's not acceptable, right? So, but here, responsive table, for instance, if the content doesn't fit, it doesn't add scroll bars to the whole screen, but just scroll bars to that specific table, right? So yeah, that's a great feature, which allows you to implement, such as going to the grades, right? If you go to grades, this gives you a big table that usually you have way too many assignments that you can't scroll through all of them. So, but you want to be able to just scroll over the table, but not necessarily the whole window. I don't want the whole window to scroll. Like this, for instance, I don't want it to scroll. I want it to stay put, right? So I only want the table to scroll. So anyway, so it has quite a few widgets, and that we can reuse right away, right? And so we don't have to reinvent that from scratch. But more importantly, right, it allows us to implement responsive design, right? And responsive design means that there's content that not necessarily fits in the screen. Like for instance, if you have a very wide screen like I have here, certainly I can splurge, right? As a developer, I can fit a lot of stuff in here, right? But as the screen might become smaller and smaller, so for instance, as the screen becomes smaller and smaller, notice that instead of being 4 columns, now it's wrapping. See that? It's 3 columns. As it's becoming smaller and smaller, notice that it becomes two columns, then 1 column. And then eventually, notice that it hides this right-hand sidebar, right? It hides it. It's gone like that, so that I can show the main content. And then if I go further down, notice that it hides the left sidebar. So it is reacting, right? It's responding to the screen size and relaying, it's laying out the content based on the new screen size, right? And so we want to be able to configure those kinds of behaviors. Certainly, we don't want to do that from scratch. And so Bootstrap provides all sorts of really nice classes, right? That is going to allow us to do that very easily. Okay. So anyway, let me install Bootstrap, right? npm install Bootstrap. And so let's see. Let me stop that for a second. Let me install Bootstrap. And then to bring Bootstrap in, right, I'm going to import it from the file system. So that imported, so I'm going to say npm start again. So when you install these libraries, they are all installed inside of node_modules. Okay, so for instance, in here now there's a new Bootstrap. There's a new Bootstrap folder, right? That wasn't there before, right? If you open it up, the actual files that we need are inside of the distribution folder, right? And then CSS. And Bootstrap is pretty big. It's gotten pretty big. And so they've broken out, each individual feature that you need into separate CSS files. And so you can import them individually, but we're actually, we're too lazy to do that. So we're gonna just import the entire library. This one, Bootstrap main.css, or this one too. So we're going to import them, from there like that. We're just gonna go into our index at the top level. So our index and the source. So here, we're going to import Bootstrap. There it is, right? So you'll notice that, right away when I imported that, notice that my look and feel here changed immediately. For instance, look at the fonts. The fonts are different, right? And all of them. So if you go to Kanbas, right, all the fonts are different. No longer are we using the default fonts, right? Now it's using, I think it's like Arial or something, but it's no longer using the Times New Roman, which was awfully awful. But another issue is that, for instance, notice that it removed the overall padding that we had originally. Notice again, right? Notice if I comment this out, you'll notice that it had an original padding. So let me comment that out. See that? It has like a padding all around. There's a padding. I think it's like an 8-pixel padding. But if you comment it out, I mean, if you add it in, notice that it removes the padding, which is fine, right? Because now we can choose what padding we want. For instance, in the Kanbas, I don't want the padding because notice that Kanbas has this over here flush, right, with the left-hand side. I don't want the padding there. I don't want an 8-pixel padding there. So I want to control that, right? Not have the browser add that on its own, right? But the labs, right? Labs look kind of funny, right? Because now the content is all, very flush to the edges, and that's not very appealing. So Bootstrap has one of the one of many classes that are available are the container classes. The container classes allow you to, at a minimum, bring back the padding, right? So for instance, I can say, I'm only going to do it for the labs, right? I don't want to apply it to the canvas because the canvas is going to deal with its own styling. How is this going to be flush with the top, or the left, or the right? So I'm only going to bring back the padding for the labs, right? Because they look kind of funny, right? That it's all flush. So let's go into the labs, and in here I'm going to add one of the more common classes that that provided by Bootstrap is container. So let's save that. All right, so container, notice that it added margins, right? Maybe a little bit too much margin. And notice that there's margin here on the left, there's margin here on the right, okay? And that and notice that as I resize the screen, notice that the margins change. See that? So it's aware of the size, which is important, right? Because we said earlier, right? It's responsive. It's aware about relaying out the content based on the screen size. So notice that as I become wider and wider, right? Notice that the main content kind of gets wider and wider, and then the margins adjust accordingly, right? So notice that as I resize, right, the main content doesn't resize, but the margins do resize up until a point, right? When there's no more, notice that it says, "Oh, I'm too narrow. I'm about to be." The main content is about to touch the edges, but we don't like that. We still want some margins, right? So what it does is that it resizes the margins, right? It puts this in the center, right? And if the space in the between doesn't fit, it just wraps inside, right? And notice that it sets the margins the same on the left and the right. This is actually a very common way of laying out most a lot of web pages follow this kind of layout, where the main content is centered, right? And you have these margins on the left. Plus, it's responsive, right? It's you have different sizes for different screen sizes. Notice that as it becomes smaller and smaller, it's going to resize again. So there's kind of these thresholds that it's aware of, right? To know to toggle between different layouts, right? And what Bootstrap does is that it names these thresholds as different screen sizes, right? So the smallest screen size is the phone. So this is how it would look on a phone, right? There's very little margin. It's mostly content, and then you have the really wide margins like that, right? So it gives them logical names. The really wide ones calls them extra large screens. Then extra large, then large, then medium, and then small, and then extra small. So it names all these screen sizes, right? And then it's aware of what to do and relay out everything by screen size. So that's one of the containers, right? That adds all this behavior. There's also another one that if I just want just my padding back, right? And I don't want any of these fancy things being in the center and aware of the screen size and resizing and blah blah blah. If I just want my 8 pixels wide padding, I can just say container fluid. So container fluid says I'm not going to do any of that fancy stuff. Instead, it's always going to be the same margin, right, all around. I think it's 15 pixels on either end, and that's it, right? If there's not more space on the right, it's just going to wrap and continue from top to bottom, left to right. Okay, but it's not going to recompute the margins and recompute the center. Okay, and so I'm going to stick with this one. I like that one. There's quite a few other ones, but those are the two main ones. And not only that, I'm only applying to the lab, but not Kanbas. Kanbas does not have that. All right, in Kanbas we're going to do something else. All right. Okay. Yeah. So another big feature in Bootstrap is the grid system. So the grid system is what's going to allow us to configure, right, a grid, rows and columns, and then decide how we want it to display, how do we want it to relay out, based on the screen size, right? So for instance, it's very common that if you are viewing some content on a very wide screen, then typically you might want to use maybe 6 columns, right? Or maybe 4 columns. But as the screen becomes narrower and narrower, right? Maybe you might want to maybe some of the columns on the right hand side, maybe move them down below the other two, right? So for instance, if you had this width, you might show 4 columns, but then in a narrower screen, you might say, okay, well, I'm just going to move, I'm going to compute a new layout and have these 2 columns maybe be below columns A and B. As it becomes even narrower, right, maybe on a phone, you might say, well, you know what, it makes no sense to have a whole bunch of columns in a phone. Instead, I'm just going to stack up all these divs one on top of another. So yeah, so how do we do that? We would like to be able to configure these kind of behavior. Right, so to do that, Bootstrap defines a grid system. Right, so let's talk about the grid system. Right, so let's look up the grid system here. Grid. So the grid system is about being able to basically define very much the table with rows and columns that we're already familiar with, right? We have a whole bunch of tables, columns, but without actually using the table and column. Right? And so notice that we're basically going to be using some Bootstrap classes that change the behavior of these divs, right, to behave like rows, and some other divs inside of that row to behave as columns, right? Very much like what we did in an earlier exercise where we define a row, and then we use float inside of that row, right, to be able to stack things horizontally. So behind the scenes, this doesn't use float; it uses flex, right? So flex is a more formal, right, alternative to render rows and columns. And so basically, we're going to be able to lay out stuff as a table, but without actually using a table. So the grid system defines these classes, row and column, and by default, the size of the columns are the same, right? So they all have the same width. Okay. Or you can override the relative size of the columns amongst each other, so that you can specify that this one is narrower than, these are, two sidebars maybe, which is 20%, 20%, and then the remainder and something in the center, right? So to do that, to change the relative sizes of these columns, what the Bootstrap developers did is that they added column sizes, right? You can say relative sizes of the columns amongst each other, right? So column 6, for instance, means 50%, right? And column 5, right, is whatever 5/12 is. It's some fraction of 12ths. So what they decided to do is to split the screen into 12 equal portions. Right? So split it up into 12 equal portions. Right? Here I believe I have, here I have an example. Yeah, here's 12 equal portions like that. Right? Okay. And so in a very wide screen, 12 columns might make sense, right? And I don't know if I could fit 12 equal columns here on the whole screen. And then you can configure and say, well, as a screen becomes smaller and smaller, I can configure each column to be twice as big, right? So for instance, as it becomes smaller, then this would be way too narrow, right? If I'm halfway, if my screen is half the size, these widths would be way too narrow, right? So I can configure it so that the column actually is twice as big. But obviously, if it's twice as big, I can't really fit 12 columns. It means that I would have to have first 6, and then below I would have to have another 6. That's exactly what I have here, right? So if I have these being twice as big because the screen is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, right? Then having so many columns makes no sense. So I can make the columns twice as big as the screen becomes smaller, right? To compensate, and then just causing everybody else to just wrap around. So for instance, as I become smaller and smaller, I might decide that each column is actually 3 columns wide, right? So the 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So each it's 3 12s. It's 25%. So each one is 25%, right? And the ones that don't fit just wrap around, right, and just fill in the remaining. And as it becomes smaller and smaller, I might say that each one is actually 4 columns wide, right? Because 6 columns in a very small screen is you can't see. So I might make it 4 columns wide. So that would allow me to only have 3 columns total. And so that would mean that they would relay out like this, right? Up until I get very narrow, right? I might, maybe on a tablet, on an iPad, small, iPad mini or something, where I might decide that maybe I want to have just half and half, right? So these are 50 and 50%. And then finally, on a small phone screen, I might decide that, hey, it makes no sense to have columns on an iPhone. I'll just stack everything just one big column, right? And stack all of them one on top of each other. So the grid system allows us to do just that, right? Lay out stuff in rows, columns, and grids, and then have them be responsive and aware of the widths, right? And decide how to do this, right? Now, to specify the relative sizes, we use these modifiers, right? And specify, oh, that's how many columns I want to be, right? And then, but then, depending on the screen size, I might want this to be, 6 columns wide, or 4, or 3, or 2, or 1, or 12. I want to be the whole width, right? So the way we do that is we have an additional modifier, which is the screen size modifier, right? We say, okay, well, the following size, right, is for small screens, medium screens, large screens, extra large, and extra extra large, right? So this allows us to combine multiple of these, right, on the same column and say, okay, well, for that screen, I want you to be 2, and for that screen, I want you to be 3, and for that screen, I want you to be 1, and for this screen, I want you to be 6, right? And you can combine them so that they're mutually they only turn on for that specific screen size. It also for the smallest screens, like the phone screen, notice that there is no screen size modifier, right? So just column, right? Just it's understood that you mean for the smallest screen size. It's also the case that if you set the screen size for a smaller screen size, then all the next ones are also configured. Right. So for instance, if I set that for the medium three columns wide, then that is inherited by a larger screen. So for larger screens, I would still be 3 columns wide, right? But not for previous one. Okay? So let's illustrate this with an example, right? So let me let's create here a Bootstrap grid, right? And let's try and recreate the same layout that we played around earlier that we implemented using float, right? Where we implemented half and half side by side, a third on the left, 2/3 on the right, and then left 20%, right 20%, and then main content 60%, right? So let's do that. Let's create a Bootstrap grid. Right. So here, let's create a component here. Bootstrap grid. We'll do export, default, Bootstrap grid, return, and let's copy the content here. We'll need here like that, so we can put in something in there. So we have go to labs, lab 2, and down below we have, there it is, right? So we have, we didn't bring this in. So let's bring this in, this Bootstrap grid, into our lab 2 right here. So this would be Bootstrap, there we go. So Bootstrap grids, there we go. Okay. So notice that we can re-implement, right, the same layout we were doing using float, but using Bootstrap. So let me add some break at the bottom, so we have some space below. And so let's look at the implementation. So here's the implementation. It says here's Bootstrap grid over here, right? We have one row and several columns. So we have a whole bunch of rows. A row, row, row. Now, unlike the tables, we don't need an outer element that says this is a table. We just start implementing just rows. And so if we have 1, 2, 3 rows with either 2 columns, or 3 columns. So let's look at the first one. So here's the row. We have 3 columns. 2. Sorry, we have 2 columns side by side, left and left, left and left, left and right. And so there's danger and primary. These are background color classes defined by Bootstrap. Also, there's text white. You can color them in a specific color. So foreground color white, background red and blue. Okay. Also notice that it's using column and column. So by default, column and column, right? If you don't specify the sizes of the columns, by default, all columns are the same size, right? So it's 50%. So that means that if I add another one, right, and I say this is success, notice that here's another column, so 3 columns. Again, they're the same size, right? If you don't specify the size, right, they're all the same size. So it would be 30%, 33% each. Okay. So let's look at the second row. So the second row is again 2 columns. There they are. So this one and then that one. So 1/3, 2/3. So basically this is, but in this one we are specifying the screen size. Notice the relative size 4 and 8. Typically they add up to 12, right? Again, with the intent that they take up the whole width of the screen. And so one might ask, well, why 12? Why is it that we're arbitrarily subdividing the screen into 12 equal parts, right? And the reason is that this is an idea borrowed from the print media, right? That if you look at magazines or newspapers and things like that, right? They typically split up the content into several columns, right? And one very common number of columns to split up is 12 columns. But why 12? Well, because it's a number that's very easily divisible, by many other numbers. It can be divided by 2, divided by 3, by 4, by 6, right? So it's very easy to create fractions with using 12, right? So anyway, we're going to borrow from that industry. So this one is read as 4/12, and this is read as 8/12, right? So 4 would be, that's 4/12, that's a third. That's 8/12, that's 2/3, right? The whole thing making up 3/3, right? Or 12/12. Okay. And then we have the last one is also a row, right, that has 3 columns. So we have one column, 2 columns, 3 columns, and they have this relative screen sizes where the 2 on either end is 2/12, 2/12s, and the one in the middle is 8/12s. So 8/12, that's 2/3, and then this is 1/3, 1/6, right? 1/6 and 1/6, right? That adds up to 1/3 total, right? So it's 20, whatever percent of that is. Okay. Anyway, with this different screen sizes, you can lay it out any which way you want. But notice that they don't have the screen size modifier. That means that this layout is the same for very wide screen. It's also the same for very small screens. So it maintains the same layout regardless of what the screen size is. But we might not want that, right? On a phone, maybe it makes no sense to have these sidebars on either end. Just they're not useful, right? Ideally, maybe we would stack all these up, into a single column. So that's where the screen size modifier comes in. So let's take a look at some examples. And so let's look at responsive design, responsive grids. So let's copy this, copy that in, and I'm just going to paste that at the bottom. There we go. Okay, so notice that for a very wide screen, so I'm not 100%. Yeah, there was at 100%. There are 4 columns, right? And as they become narrower and narrower, right, the 4 columns might not make sense anymore, right? Because I don't have such a wide screen enough to fit that many columns. So I might decide that perhaps it's way too narrow. I can't read the text anymore. So for instance, when I reach this threshold over here, notice that I might decide to just double the columns, right? Double the columns, and then because it's too narrow, I can't read it. And so that means that obviously C and D won't fit anymore, because if I double A and double B, right, that was just going to take the whole width. So that means that C and D would go underneath. And that's what happens here. Notice that when I reach this threshold, boom, right, column A is twice as big, B is also twice as big, and so on and so forth. So now they become 2 rows with 2 columns. right? And as I keep becoming smaller and smaller, I might decide to just flip and just have just one big column, right? And just stack the whole thing vertically. Okay, so let's look at the implementation. So it's this one right here. We have the responsive grid. We have one row, just one row. And then we have, in total, we have four columns. And so let's look at each one. Each one is pretty much the same. It says that column 12 means that this is defined by extra, for the extra small screen, which is it wants to for the extra small screen column A, all of them B, C, they're all the same, right? So they all have the same style, set of classes, and so it says that for medium I want to be 6, for extra large I want to be 3, and for extra small I want to be 12, right? Which means in fractions it means 3/12, right? So so 3/12, that's a quarter, right? 6/12, that's 50%, right? And 12/12, that's 100%. So for extra small screens, I want to be 100%, and that's what it is, right? I'm taking the whole screen. For medium-sized screens, so as it becomes bigger and bigger, there's medium, there it is. So I reach medium. So I'm skipping over. The small screen, right? So there's extra small, there's small. I haven't configured it. So what happens with between extra small and small? What happens to small? I haven't configured it. Well, what happens is that all throughout small and all throughout small, I maintain the same layout as my smaller screen size. So this is equivalent to saying that column extra small screen is 12. Also for small screen is also 12, right? And so that's that. So small, extra small, I'm still 12. And when I reach medium, right, I become 6, which is 50%. So 6 is 50%, 6/12. Right? Then there's extra large. Well, what about large? I skipped over large. Large, I'm still half until I reach extra large. Then I become 3/12, which is a quarter. So yeah, 25%. What about extra large? It's also 25%. So you only need to define for one size, and then that sticks for the remaining bigger sizes as well, right? So you don't need to define it for all of them, although you can, right? But here we're not, right? Make sense? So yeah, so you can change the layout as your screen changes sizes. And here's just a more dramatic version of this, where you have 12 columns, and then they resize to different sizes. Okay. So let's talk about hiding content, right, for responsive, because we see that that's a very common strategy, right? When when implementing applications that need to behave correctly at different screen sizes, right? We need to be able to hide content, right, as the screen becomes smaller. So, for instance, here, right, notice that as I become smaller, we have to decide, what content is the most important content. Certainly, the modules, giving us access to the main content of slides or movie or videos or educational content, right? This is the main content, right? The modules. Everything else is just sidebars that allows us to navigate to other important content, but they themselves are not very important. So as the screen real estate becomes smaller and smaller, we might be confronted with making a decision on what it is that we want to keep, right? That we might need to make a decision of say, well, maybe my sidebars are not as important because as I'm becoming smaller and smaller, my main content is becoming less relevant, right? They're not taking as much prominent space, real estate. So we might decide that says, hey, you don't want this sidebar on the right hand side. That's not really as important. I might still decide that these two sidebars are still important, but maybe not this one, right? So as I reach the specific screen size, notice that I can just hide it. So it's gone. See that? When the screen size becomes too small, it's not as relevant. I'm going to make an executive decision, and I'm just going to hide it. But and so that I can give that space that it was being taken by that sidebar. I can give it back to the main content, right? And it's the most important content. So same thing as I become smaller and smaller, right? I might again be confronted with the same question of what do I do with the sidebars? Do I keep them? Right? Notice that this is becoming small. This is wrapping weird, right? Maybe I should hide those too, right? And so I might decide, there we go. So I reach a threshold where the sidebars are hidden. They're hidden, but still useful. Notice that they're still available in two drop downs. See, there's drop downs here, right? That if you click them, if you click on the left hand side, you still have access to your dashboard, your account, right? Your inbox, calendar, blah blah blah. You can dismiss it. So you just one extra click, and it's implemented nicely as this drawer that comes, animates out in and out. You don't have to, right? It could be that you navigate to another screen, right? And then that other screen allows you to navigate elsewhere. But here's a nice implementation with using a drawer. And there's also the course navigation that allows you to navigate within a course, but implemented as this accordion. Okay, shows and hides. All right. So notice that this introduces the fact that thinking about smaller screens like phones, right, kind of makes you think about what is most important, right? And certainly here the developers decided that this this list of modules is the most important part, that all the other ones are secondary, and that and those secondary things that are not as important, maybe you want to show them, you know, when you can show them when the screen becomes small, bigger and bigger, right? You can, they become small and bigger, so you can splurge and say, I have more space, so I'll show them then, right? So this way of thinking is very important, right? And is often referred to as mobile first, right? Where the where you decide that, hey, phones are increasingly a larger portion of the audience, right? That is visiting your websites, that is using online applications, right? And so we should start thinking of designing our application geared towards this, growing demographics. It's probably more than 50% of everybody who is ever going to come to your website, right? They're going to come to you, through a phone, right? So you should start there. You should start designing for the most use cases, right? That are going to be, your application is going to be catering to, right? So Bootstrap has this mantra, has this this attitude, right? That a lot of their classes are geared towards making it easy for implementing for the phone, for the mobile, for the small screen, and then also allowing you to target bigger screens, right? Certainly, but with a mobile first approach. Okay. So how do we do that? How do we implement those hiding things and showing things? Let's take a look at an example. So here we have a little component, right, that that displays and hides different content based on the screen size, right? And so you play around with that, right? It's using these classes D block, right, and D none. But what they do is that they turn on and off the display of something, right? D none, right, hides content, whereas D block, right, makes it render like a block element, right? Just like this flex, right, but this block, right? And block just renders it just like a regular block element, right? It displays it. So toggling these two things allows you to show things and not show and hide other things. But then it also allows you to target different screen sizes, meaning I want to hide it or I want to show it for different screen sizes. And so, for instance, here I'm saying for medium size, I don't want to show it, but for small screens, I do want to show it, right? And again, for this one, I want to show it for medium, but I don't want to show it for large. I want to show it for large, but not for extra large. I want to show it for extra large, but not extra large. So what this component does is that it displays different screen sizes, right? At different, as you resize your screen, right? It shows the component what the screen size is, right? So play around with that. We're going to actually illustrate this feature of hiding and showing when we get to the Kanbas application, right? So that we'll show how is that we could implement, right? Hiding the sidebars, as the screen becomes smaller and smaller, right? And then showing them again as it becomes larger. Okay. Tables, right? An example of tables. Play around with that. Responsive tables, forms, right? So let's take a look at implementing them in the Kanbas application. Okay. All right. So let's take a very short break, and when we come back, we're going to start talking about implementing the Kanbas application. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at how we can use the skills that we've been learning about in this lecture. Right? Learning about CSS, the React icons, Bootstrap, and how we can take all those skills, right, and then apply them to an actual application that we've been working throughout the semester, right? In the for the several weeks that we've been working on building a couple of screens from inspired on the Kanbas application. We worked on the sign-in screen, profile screen, the dashboard, courses, modules, right? The home screen. So we're going to revisit all those implementations, and then start applying Kanbas and CSS and all the icons, right? So that it looks more what they're supposed to look like from the screenshots, from the actual application. Obviously, it's not going to look exactly the same, but we're going to make an effort to make it as close as possible, right? So let's take a look at playing around with some of that. So first, let's take a look at the styling the sidebars, right? So the sidebars that we had so far, right? We have the sidebar for the Kanbas sidebar, right? That allows us to navigate between the account, dashboard, courses, calendar, and so on and so forth. The one that is on the website, the real website, has a black background. It highlights the current item that we're looking at right now, right? And also it has the icons in there. The color of the font changes and whether it's selected or not. And so this is the one we have so far, right? We have this ugly list of hyperlinks, right? And so let's try and make it look like this, right? Like what we have here on the right. Notice that the icon's slightly different. These are taken from React icons. So the icons are not exactly the same ones, but that's fine. I mean, we can use icons that are inspired on the original ones, but they don't have to be quite exactly the same ones. Also, we're going to highlight the correct one. We're going to add the image for Northeastern, right, and the background and the foreground color, right? So let's take a look at it. Now we already have an implementation. Let's take a look at the current implementation. All right, so if we look at the current implementation with a Kanbas, so this is the implementation that we have right now, right? Northeastern account, blah 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 blah, right? And it works. I mean, we can go to the dashboard, we can go to the course, right? We can go to modules, blah blah blah, right? So let's revisit and paint this so it looks more like the target application like this. So we'll make the Kanbas nav bar look more like that, right? And then the course navigation will make it look more like that. Okay. All right, so let's first focus on this left-hand side. So let's close all these. So close all. And let's open up the Kanbas root landing page. Well, first of all, we don't need this canvas here, right? The title. So we'll remove that. We don't need that. Then here's the canvas navigation, right? Well, we can go in there and then we can start styling it. So for instance, let's see. So this is suggesting that we add a style of 120 pixels wide. So we can do that, right? We can make the top level here style to be equal to width of 120 pixels, right? So that's the width of this, and then we can make the overall div, the overall div uh, have the background color to be black. So BG black, that's a class that is available in Bootstrap, and you have a whole bunch of colors, right, that are available. So let's add it here. Class name. We have a BG black. So that immediately makes the background be black like that. Plus what? Let's see. We're also going to be using list group. So list group is a class in Bootstrap that allows it to render lists, and in particular, either lists with using UL or a list of hyperlinks, which we have. There's a list of hyperlinks. We have A is a hyperlink, then we have link, and then we have a whole bunch of links, right? And it makes it look much prettier. It puts borders in between. It adds some nice spacing. So let's do that. Let's add the list group to all of them. So this would be the list group like that, and then notice that it adds some nice spacing in between. Also, that would mean that each item, each link, right, has to have its own list group item, right? So let's grab that class and then just apply it to all of these. So oops, like that space. Let's add that to all these links. Okay, like that. All the links. Also, we notice that by default, the background of the links is white, right? So we'll need to fix that, right? We really want some of them to be white, some of them to be black. Also, the spacing in between, that's probably because we have these breaks everywhere. We don't need those breaks anymore. Let's remove them. Let's remove those breaks. Let's see, how does that work? Yeah, there we go. Let's remove them. Remove. There we go. Okay, so that's the basic styling of a list in Bootstrap. Notice we have this rounded corners. Maybe we don't want that, right? So we can remove those rounded corners with a rounded zero. So rounded zero is one of several classes that allow you to configure the rounded corners, right? Rounded zero removes the roundedness, right? So no radius, so they're flush, they're square. But there's rounded one, rounded two, rounded three, which allow you to add more and more roundedness or no roundedness whatsoever. So we can turn that off. We can say rounded zero, rounded zero. There's a whole bunch of them, right? We can say rounded zero. So that's makes it square. So notice that indeed now it's not rounded anymore. There we go. See that? Okay. Also, we want this to show or hide, right, for different screen sizes. And we have D none allows us to hide. Notice that it goes away. Or D block allows us to bring it back, right? And we can target different screen sizes. We can say that initially, right, at a small screen, by default, it's not showing. But as the screen becomes bigger and bigger, then we want to show it, right? So we could say, for instance, we could say let's bring this to 100%. So we could see. So for instance, we could say by default, I don't want to see it. So it's not there. But at a particular screen size, I want to see it. Right? So for instance, I can say add screen size of extra large, right? I want to show it, right? So that means that if I make this bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, there it is, it's showing, right? And then when I go smaller than extra large, it hides. So there's a threshold there, right there. See that? Now, probably we want to show even in smaller screens, even small screens, right? So smaller screens, like I want to show it here. So I can make this a little smaller and say, well, for extra large, there it is, extra large. So show it for extra large, and so up until I get to just large, and then it's going to disappear. Boom, it's gone, right? So now it shows for extra large, but it hides with extra large. So it shows for extra large and above, but it hides for just large, right? So that means that it shows for extra large and also for extra large. So it's extra large and above, right? It's this applies. Okay. Or I might say that maybe for large screens, I also want to show it. I'm going to say large screens too, and above, large screens and above. So if I go smaller and smaller, so there it is. That's medium. So I guess for medium, I also want to show them. So I'm going to say medium, MD. So there it is for medium. So if I become smaller and smaller, right? Okay, so now I'm going into territory of small screen, and maybe I don't want to show it anymore, right? So I'll show it for medium screen and above. Make sense? All right. So this combination, right, allows you to start off with nothing and then show it, or vice versa. You can say, well, I want to show it when it's small, right, and or when I show it when it's big. Okay. So yeah, the thing that we like to be able to do is have this particular the sidebar be kind of like stuck right at the top left corner. Now, the way the real sidebar works in the dashboard, right? So if you go here, notice that this here in the right, it's kind of like stuck here in the corner. It doesn't go anywhere. If you scroll the whole thing, right, notice that it just stuck there. It's not going anywhere, right? And so we can accomplish that by using fixed position, right? And we can turn on position fixed, right? Is a class in Bootstrap that allows you to set the position property, absolute, relative, um, fixed, static, right? So let's set a position fixed. So we could say position fixed, like that. So now notice that now it's fixed, and because it's fixed, all the other content is kind of it's behaving as if this is not even pushing anything, right? It's not contributing, for instance, to the horizontal padding or the horizontal position of the other elements. So it's stuck there. Now you would only be able to see it if I had something to scroll. But notice that I'm scrolling. Notice if I don't have position fixed, notice that this scrolls with the content. See that? It scrolls up and down. But if I put the position fixed, notice that it doesn't scroll, right? Everything else scrolls, but this one doesn't, right? The sidebar doesn't. Something else that we probably want to be able to do, right, is that notice that say I had more content. So for instance, if I go to my module, right, and here I have ULs, and let's add a whole bunch of other line items here, because I just want to illustrate that. Say I have lots of content, right, and I would actually. Oh, no, it disappears. If I'd be scrolling, it would not go. It would be stuck. But later on, we'll add more content. That would be, and then I can show you how the case is that when you have a lot of content, everything scrolls, but this stays fixed. The other thing that we'd like to be able to do is that this, the height of this whole thing should stretch the entire height and width of the screen, right? So let's do that. What we can do is that because it's position fixed, I can now stretch I can put it exactly where I want it. By default, it's 0, 0, right? My left position is 0 by default, unless I change that. And the top is also 0 by default. Now I can put it at the bottom, so I could say bottom 0. So it puts it at the bottom. There it is. See that? Oops, bottom 0. So I can put it wherever I want, at the bottom or the top. So by default is top 0, right? But here I'm overrunning to bottom 0. So the bottom is now flush with the bottom of the screen. But if you put both bottom 0 and top 0, it's going to stretch the whole thing, right? Kind of hiding anything behind it, right? So I can say top 0. So now it's stretched, from the top to the bottom, and adding the background color, right? The background color black, right? This whole thing is black, right? The only reason this is white, right, is because we've made the we that's inherited from the list group. The list group makes the background white, right? And so we're gonna have to override that in a minute. We're gonna override it in the hyperlinks themselves. But we're gonna override the background to be black when we need it to be. Okay. All right. So what else? Yeah. So they're all group items, and they all should have background black if they're not selected. But if they're selected, then the background should be white, right? So let's for instance let's make all of them black except say the account. The account is currently selected, right? So let's select that. So let's make them all black. Let's see. So this one we're going to turn it off. So BG black, like that. There it is, right? Probably the foreground color. Maybe we want to make the text white. So text white is another common class, right? That turns on the color of the text. Although the common color that is used for the text sometimes is red or white. So white when it's not selected, but red if it's selected, right? So let's apply these to all of them except the account. So let's leave the account alone. We're going to highlight the account. Let's apply, this black, right, white on black on all of them. Black, white on black, white on black, right? There we go. Oops, did I? Oh, I had that already. Inbox and then the labs. There we go, like that. Okay. Oh, the dashboard too. Where's the dashboard? Dashboard here. Add it like that. Okay, there we go. Whereas the account, we're going to leave highlighted, right? So it's going to be BG white, and the text is going to be danger. No, danger is red. Danger, like that. There we go. See, account is foreground is red, and the background is white. Okay. Also, all these, notice that they're kind of like justified to the left, where they actually should be justified center justified. See that? The real one, centers the text. So let's do that. So we can use text center. That's going to center the text. So let's apply that to all of them. So let's say it would be here. So this would be text center, right? And then we can paste that to all of them. Let's save that. Say, there it is. So account now is centered. Center the background, the dashboard, the courses, right? The calendar, the inbox, and the labs. There we go. Also these dashes, these borders, right? That's also implemented because of the list group. List group adds these borders, so we can turn that off. You can say border 0, so that's the width of the border. So border 0 just makes them infinitesimally small. So we can say, border first the outer one, right, and for the overall lists, and then apply to each one individually. So that we remove that. Remove that one too. Then this one. So we're removing all those borders, right? There we go. And then the labs down below. Okay, that's looking much more closer to what the target, the target here. We still need these icons, and so we can look for a few. For instance, let's look at the account. If we look up some icons from React icons, we can say, maybe account. We can find let's say this one over here. So let's say maybe this one, right? And so there's the way we would use it. We can copy that, into the Kanbas navigation. We can import that particular icon, right? And then apply it like that, right? Wherever we need it. So it would be in the account. So we can just paste it into here like that and see how that looks like. Okay, so notice that there's the account. Now it's a little too small, but also it's inline, so we can maybe add a break. You can add a break like that. So they're separated, and then you can set the size of you can change the size, the font size, and Bootstrap has several classes that can set the size of the font. We could have class name, font size 1. That's the biggest, I believe. Yeah, that's the biggest. There we go. Right. Same thing for dashboard. We can look up for something like dashboard. The icon that they use is kind of like this like a gauge, right? So let's see if we can have a gauge. No, maybe like a meter. We can do a measure. Okay, like this. See that? So we can copy that. Maybe we can import that like speedometer, like that, and then we can copy this, right, and apply it to the dashboard. So we can say dashboard. We can create a BR like that, and that renders like that, and we can add the class name, and we can change the size to be the bigger. Okay. Now for this, I think the color would be of not selected. So something that is not selected, this should be red, right? So we can change this to be text danger. So it's red. There it is, like that. Whereas this, right, if it is selected, the text should be red. Text should, oh yeah, that works, right? Text, okay, yeah, all right, that's good. That makes sense? Okay. So for courses, we're looking for books, right? Things like that. And I think in the assignment, we do give you some icons that you can use. So let's copy those at the top. So some of those icons. Let's see, do they collide with some of them that we? Oh yeah, so this is React icons IO5 is declared twice, right? So let's actually move this here. We don't have to have this twice. Let's see. All right, that's it, right? And then we can use them in several places. So for the dashboard, for the courses, I believe we use the book. So it would be the let's see which one. So for the dashboard, what do we use for the dashboard? Dashboard, okay, with speedometer. For the courses, we use the book. The courses, we can use the book like that, right? Like that. Oops. There we go. Courses, and then the calendar. We have a calendar here, I think. FA calendar, and we can do the class name, and this would be FS1 and text danger, right? And there we go. Okay. So anyway, you know, follow the instructions in the assignment, right, and style that sidebar. Okay. Now the Position fixed. Okay, we did that. Bottom 0, top 0. No, no, okay, we did that. Okay, great. Now, another thing that we want to do is not use tables like we've been using it so far, right? So for instance, in the top level Kanbas, right, the layout, this left-hand side, right-hand side layout, right, that's being accomplished with tables. So that's a no-no, right? So let's remove them. Let's remove all these tables. Let's remove all that, like that, right? So now you have this kind of stuck on the left side, right? And then this just stuck at the top left, right? So it's underneath. And so let's try to move it. Let's wrap this with a div so that we can try and move this over a little bit, right? So that it's not underneath. The reason it's underneath is that because this is fixed, right? It's no longer pushing on the element, for some horizontal spacing, right? So we need to move it ourselves using CSS, right? So to do that, right, what we're going to do is that we're going to declare a media rule, right, that says that I would like to add a left padding. I like to add some padding, but only for some screen sizes, right? I only want to apply it, right, when this is showing, right? If it's not showing, I don't want to push it, right? So notice that if I become big like that, then yes, I want this to be moved over a few pixels. But when I'm not showing it, it's actually I want to leave it where it is, right? I don't want to move it. Right, so we can do that with a media query. And media queries basically allow you to, apply CSS if, right, a particular rule. In our case, if the size of the screen is below 768 pixels, right? So let's copy that, right, and let's bring it over to our CSS. And for Canvas, we have styles, I believe, right? And styles here. Okay, this is a new, I thought I had styles, Canvas styles. Oh, we don't have styles. Okay, we'll need a Canvas style. So let's do a styles. So styles.css. And in here, we're going to declare that and then apply, right, this ID, right, is in my canvas. There's my ID, right? And then within that canvas, I'm going to apply to a class that's called WD main offset. I want to apply this padding to a class that is in my WD canvas ID, right? So I'm going to apply it to this div. So I'm going to copy this class, right? And in here, I can say class name, like that, okay? And then I can import this class and say import styles CSS. There we go. All right, so notice that now it is being pushed off with some padding, enough to not be under, right, this sidebar. But notice that as I become smaller and smaller, I'm going to hide the sidebar, and notice that this goes back to its initial behavior. So it only appears only when the sidebar appears, then it's pushed, and then it hides, and then it no longer pushes the padding. Make sense? Excellent. Okay. Also, we're going to add some default padding. Notice that this is flush like that when there's nothing there. So we're going to make it so that there's always some padding, right, all around. But in addition to that, we'll add some padding when the sidebar appears. So when the sidebar appears, we add that padding, and then when it's not there, it just uses the normal padding tree. So this is a class, a Bootstrap class that allows you to add padding all around, just P3. There's different sizes. There's the biggest one, I think it's 5. So that's a lot of padding, maybe too much, right? But 3 it's a little less, and then 2 is a little less, and then 1 is the smallest. Or 0, I don't want any padding, right? Which I don't. I do want to have at least some padding. Okay. All right. So now let's do the same thing for this sidebar, right? The courses sidebar. We want it to look like more like this, like that. So where the we have the the text is red, right? The selected one is black, and the selected one has like a dash, a border on the left side. So let's do that. Let's take a look how we could do that. So what we're going to do is that same thing, right? We're going to add a list group to all these, right? And list group item. Start off with some default look and feel, adding some padding all around and borders and whatnot. So let's do that. So, so in my courses, right, we had the sidebar, this course navigation, and what we're going to do is that we're going to add a we're going to add a class name here. So these are all, there's going to be a list group. So notice it already adds the spacing. So we're not going to need this extra border BRs. So let's remove those. Okay, and then we're going to add to the class name here. These are all going to be list group items. List group items. Right, and let's add them to all these. Oh, then let's this group item. There it is. And let's add it to all these. Okay, paste, 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 and paste. Save. Okay, so now we have a nice list, and we need to override some of the behaviors. For instance, the rounded corner we don't want, right? So we can turn that off. We can say border 0 around the rounded 0. rounded 0, so no roundedness around. And then what we're going to do is that we do need to highlight one of them, right? The one that is active, and so there's already a class that allows you to do that. That is part of the list group classes that you can highlight it and say, well, that one is a currently highlighted or selected item, right? And so any one of them that you apply to, right? It kind of like turns it on, right? So that it allows you to highlight the one that is. And it's consistent, across all list groups. Okay, so let's just apply to the first one, that one. Okay, and also what we're going to do is that we're going to turn off the borders for all of them. So let's do border 0 for all of them. No border. Although we do want borders for the first one. So we'll fix that in a minute. So let's go back and set all the borders 0 except the first one, the one that's selected. Right. There we go. Okay, so now there's none of them have borders. Also, the color of the text, right? The color of the text should be what? All of them red except the one that's selected, right? So they all should be, text danger, right? So let's copy that class to all of them except the first one, right? So the one that is selected is not going to have text danger, but all the other ones will, right? So let's apply text danger to all of them so that we turn them into red, right? So let's like that, right? Turn them all red. There we go. Okay, there we go. So, but this one, we don't want it to be the background white, blue. We want it to be white, right? And the border, we do want a border, but only on the left-hand side, right? And also the text should be black, right? So we can override that. Let's override it. So basically what we want to say is that, the way that Bootstrap is styling it is not exactly how I want to style it, right? So we can override what Bootstrap does, right? So what we're going to do is that we're going to add a class up here, WD, so that we can target this class and say, hey, this class list group, if it's combined with my web development class, it should look slightly different, right? If it's just on its own list group, let it render like it normally renders. But if it's combined with my class, then I would like to override the look and feel. Okay, and so we can take a look at what Bootstrap does. Styles it. Like for instance, this hyperlink. This first, the one that is active. The one that is active, right? Notice that here's the definition by Bootstrap, right? Dot the class list group item combined dot active. So both classes are being applied to that one item, both of them, right? Not that one, sorry. Yeah, list group item and active are being applied. And so it says, if that's true, if class list group is applied and class active is applied, Z index is 2, the color, the foreground color is white, the background color is blue. So exactly this I want to override. I don't want this. Instead, I want the background color to be white, right? The foreground color to be black, and I like to add some border, right? So this actually I want to be, background color white, right? And this black. So here I have the class, and so basically what I'm is saying that if my list group item active, right? If my list group item active, which is this one, if it's inside, right? If this class is being applied inside a div whose class is WD, right? So that's the rule. It says if there's a list group that has not only list group class but my class too, and then in there there are list group items, right? That are active. I want the foreground color to be black and the background color to be white, and I want the border left to be 3 pixels wide. I want it to be solid black, right? So let's do that. Let's apply this, right, and apply it to my styles down here. Save that. And when I save it, notice that this will change. There we go. See that? The background now is white, the foreground is black, right, and the style, the border is highlighted on the left side. Make sense? All right. Okay. So there you have it, right? So we have now, this is starting to look very much like this, right? We have the courses sidebar, we have the Kanbas sidebar, right? And they appear and disappear as needed, right? Yeah. Actually, this wants to also disappear. Notice that when this is small, when this is too small, notice that both these two sidebars disappear, right? They disappear together. Yeah, right. So we want this sidebar to do the same thing, right? So this sidebar, let's make this small. Okay, we don't want this sidebar there either, right? So let's take the same strategy that we use for the canvas navigation, right? This one over here that says D none, right, and DMD block, right? Let's apply that also to the other navigation sidebar, right? The course navigation sidebar. We're going to apply that here, like that, and notice that it disappears. There we go, right? Because neither one of them should be shown. So if I make this bigger, notice that both of them appear and both of them disappear, right? Just like the real one, right? So this disappears when it's too small, and then it reappears when it's big enough, right? So ours also behaves the same way. Everybody good? Okay. All right. All right, so let's talk about styling the dashboard. Right? So currently, the dashboard is it's just just a bunch of images. Right? If we go to the dashboard, you have some images and some links to the courses. It allows you to navigate there, but it's nowhere near as pretty as the one from Canvas. Right? The real Canvas, right? When it's very wide. It shows this grid of kind of like these cards, right, that shows the courses, right? And there's nice gutters in between. There's some nice spacing, and it's also responsive. So as it becomes smaller and smaller, it becomes they don't have enough space. It starts wrapping. So instead of having 4 columns, it becomes 3 columns. And if you keep going, smaller and smaller, it becomes only 2 columns. And it's when it's small enough, then it just hides the sidebar, right? And then just shows just one big column. So how would we implement that? Well, we're going to be using the layout cards to the card layout from Bootstrap, right? That card layout from Bootstrap, right? That if you go there, you can see that you can use these code snippets, right, to achieve these kind of grids where you have images at the top, right? You have text on below, maybe some buttons you can add, and you can configure how many columns you want, right? And the size of it would be fixed, so that if it becomes smaller and smaller, they start wrapping around. Okay. So anyway, so I took this code as an example. Right. Notice that you have an outer row, and then each card is a column. Right. Each card is a column, and then here you can configure how many columns does your grid have. So here's you have 2 columns like that. Oh, sorry, 2 columns like that, or you can change this to 3 columns. So with 3 columns, then it would look like that, right? And you can say 4 columns, 5 columns. You can change it to different columns you want. So we're gonna do this, similar configuration, right? So here we have a set of classes that I've provided, right? Some example classes that we have the outer row, and we're gonna have 5 columns at the top, right? And then you can set, the gutter. This is the, how much spacing do you want between the cards, right? Also, how wide you want them, 300 pixels. I've added some divs, right? To remove, to add some rounded corners around, right? And also I've removed any hyperlink decorations, so like the underlines. So remove that, and also change the color instead of blue to dark, text dark, right? So let's do that. Let's grab this as an example, and then once we have this template, we can then use it to implement several other ones. All right. So let's do that. So I'm just gonna copy this here. Copy the actually no, this is just one of them. I'm just gonna copy that, and I'm just gonna replace the current implementation for the dashboard. So let's see. So let me bring in the dashboard. And so here are my courses. So my courses is WD course dashboard courses. I need to add this class first. Let's add this class. It's going to be a row. That's the outer container for all the courses, right? And then in there, each course will look like that. So I'm going to grab that. So I'm just going to paste it at the top, right? I'm going to paste it at the top, and then I need to close it here. Like that. So I'll close that. There we go. I do need to import link, although I do have link. Oh, link, I do have 2. What's it complaining about? Link has no corresponding closing tag. Oh, yeah. Apparently, I don't have a closing tag. Yes, I do. Closing images. This div here. Header. Ooh, I'm missing a tag here. There we go. And the class row, I think it just needs some extra. Let me close that. I think I'm seeing some extra divs here. Just a second. I probably need to close a couple of divs. There we go. All right, so there we go. We have one card, right? And still navigates to same place, right? Navigates to the course. That's perfect, right? If I click anywhere, it navigates. So I can take this same course, right? This one course, and just copy and paste it several times, right? One per course, right? And they all look the same. Probably I need this to make this expand, right? Probably the parent. Oh, because we're still using tables, I believe. We're still using tables, and so we need to fix that. All right, we'll fix that a little later. Although, let's see, what are we doing here? I believe I changed that a little later. Responsive modules, styling home, people screen, account screen, assignment screen. No, I don't have that. Probably in the assignments. Let's see. Styling, canvas navigation. Oh, okay. Did I do this in the canvas navigation? Let's see. Did I do that? And the top level canvas? Yes, I did. All right, so we'll take a look at that a little later. Yeah, we'll take a look at that a little later. Let's continue. All right, so let's take a look at styling modules. So currently the module implementation is pretty lame, right? It's this is the current implementation. You have just a when you navigate, you have a this kind of like nested lists that can that represent each one of the modules, and then within those modules you have several lessons in there, right? And then you have this course status, just a few buttons, whatnot. So let's revisit this, right? So this is the home. Modules is only the modules with no course navigation, and so but home adds this course status, and the modules is just reused for that one screen. So let's focus on the modules. Let's revisit this so that it looks more like it's supposed to be. So first of all, the modules are responsive, right? In that on a wide screen, you can see 3 or 4 columns, right? If you're in the home, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 columns. If you're in the modules, you only have 3, 1, 2, and 3. But then as you resize, right, things appear and disappear. So if you're at home, I've shown you before that if it becomes smaller and smaller, right, this last sidebar disappears and it becomes even smaller. The 2 sidebars on the left disappear, right? So we want to implement that. So this illustrates this, right? That even if you they become so narrow that you don't have access to the canvas navigation and the course navigation, they're still available, right? You can still click and has this drawer that pops up, so you can still navigate to other portions such as the dashboard, the account, right, the calendar, and whatnot. Whereas within a particular course, you can still navigate to quizzes, assignments, right, Piazza, and whatnot, right, from this drop down. Okay, so yeah, it's still available. They should disappear and but still have the functionality. So how do we implement that? Let's just do the part where we have the uh, the responsiveness, which we already have, right? We already have that this left-hand side sidebar disappears, right? Disappears. We have that. That's done. We do need to implement this, right? That the course status also disappears, but earlier, right? It just disappears. If this disappears at medium, this probably disappears at large, right? So it's not there anymore. And then when it gets narrower and narrower, then we hide these over here, right? So we'll do that. But first, before we do that, let's focus on implementing the main content, right? The modules themselves, right? And then once we have that, we can certainly reuse this in the home, right? To combine it with course status so that it looks more what the target wireframes look like. So first, maybe let's focus on this set of buttons here, in particular because it introduces this widget of the dropdown that we need JavaScript for that. And so it'll be an interesting learning experience for that. Also, this this icon, right, where you have a checkbox with a surrounded with green and whatnot. This is unfortunately there's no if you do this just with a single icon, it's going to have the middle one, in the center, the white is actually going to be transparent, right? So this is actually a combination of 2 icons, just a white circle in the background, and then on top of it, it's a checkbox, right? So let's play around with that. Right, so how do we implement this, right? We'll call this the modules controls component, right? Well, first of all, let's implement the checkbox, right? So the checkbox is actually going to be a combination of two React icons. One is going to be just a plain circle, white, okay, and then a checkbox, right? A circle checkbox, which is going to be green, with text success. But we're going to overlay it, right? We're going to make it absolute position, position absolute, and then we're going to move it, right? We're going to move it with style top, so that typically it would show on top, right? We're going to move it so that it stacks up one on top of the other, right? Not one above and below, but one in front and the other one below it, right? So yeah, so let's do that. Let's create a green check mark component. So oh, what the? Why is it doing that? It's not letting me go to the other. That's weird. Okay, do that again. Okay, and in the modules, so courses and the modules here, in the modules, let's create the check mark, green check mark, right? And so let's paste this code in there like that. Okay. So now we have a green check mark, right? The combination of two icons. And once we have that, we can start focusing on implementing, these buttons. And one of the buttons uses the green checkbox, right? So okay, we have a checkbox. Let's create the modules control, which is going to be several buttons, right? One of the buttons is going to have the green check mark that we just created, right? The first is going to have a button that is red, right? So notice it has a button is going to be a large button, right? It's going to be the button danger that fills it out to be red, right? Also, we have this is margin at the end of size 1, so I'm adding a little bit of margin at the end. Otherwise, the buttons would render flush with one another. This adds a little bit of margin between them. Also, we're going to float them so that they all end up on the right hand side, right? We're all going to be floated to the end, so they're going to they're all going to be towards the end over here of the modules. So these are all floated to the end, right? And so also the margins in between this ME1, right? It just adds this little white space in between. Otherwise, it would be flush and it would look awful. Okay. So yeah, so let's create the module controls. The module controls here in the modules, right? And let's copy the code. And this is part 2. Now this list over here, this list down here is how we're going to implement the dropdown, right? So Bootstrap has a dropdown widget. So if you look it up, dropdown. So dropdown. So dropdown is just basically a button that when you click it, it comes up with a whole bunch of options that you can choose from, right? Now it does not use the standard DOM select element, the HTML select element with the options. Instead, it uses a combination of buttons, right, and a list. Okay, and then what it does is that the list is not shown at first. It's not shown, but when you click on the button, then the list appears, right? And then it has classes so that it looks like that, right? So that it floats on top of everything else, right? But under the button. And the way they know about each other, that if this button, shows this list, is that you have you wrap them with a drop down, so they know that the button and the list are bound to one another, and we use JavaScript, right, that grabs buttons like this, instead of a drop down, But you need to configure, which is the button that is responsible for toggling this here, right? And you have to mark it down. It says, okay, well, this is the button, right? That's going to toggle the whole thing, right? So anyway, so I have that implementation here. The button is this one. This is the drop down. And this is the button, publish all, and this is the list down below, right? Which is going to show publish all with the check mark, right? As shown in the wireframe. Okay. So we have that. So once we have that, we can bring that into the modules. We can bring that into the modules, right? The modules, right? So it renders at the top. Right? So once we have that, we can go to modules in here, right, and bring in that component. Modules controls. There we go. Right. There we go. So we have, and now I only implemented those two buttons. I only implemented those two buttons, and you can implement all the other buttons. So here's a module that doesn't do anything but publish all would display the list underneath, but it doesn't because it doesn't have JavaScript enabled, right? So we need to load the JavaScript classes, styles, and the JavaScript scripts, right, that are for Bootstrap, right? So let's bring those in. By default, it doesn't work, right? We need to bring in the JavaScript. So the JavaScript is available under the node underscore modules, right? So if you go there and you look for Bootstrap, you'll notice that under here, it'll have, under distribution, it has a CSS part, which we already imported, but it also has some JavaScripts, right? That you can import as well, right? So that our the drop downs work, the pop-ups work, the dialog boxes work, right? So we can turn that on and import it. So I did that already here. We're going to import like this from the distribution JavaScript, so Bootstrap bundle min. So we do that at the top at the entry level of the index. So index in the source, that one, yep, right where we did the Bootstrap. So underneath, let's load that in. Right now, this should work. There we go. See that this shows toggles on and off. Okay. All right. Awesome. Okay. So we did that. We did the module control, and we brought it in. We brought in the modules control. Now we're going to style this here, right? So that this looks more like that, okay, like that. So we have the checkbox, right? We the check mark. We're going to style this border here on the left. We're going to add a whole bunch of icons here at the end. We'll put in this vertical ellipses here. So let's do that. So what we're going to do is that first, the UL, we're going to add list group, and we'll turn off the roundedness, right? And all the line items are going to be list group items, right? Like we did earlier. So I'm just going to copy this. So instead of doing this from scratch, I'm just going to grab this, and I'm going to replace my implementation of the modules. Modules, where are you? So modules here. I'm just going to replace this implementation since I have it already here in the assignment. So paste that and copy this as well. Paste that underneath. I have an extra div, I believe. Oops. There we go. Okay. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, not quite. Not quite. Oh, probably because I never made this wide enough. Okay, we'll need to fix that. And also, there's additional classes that I'm going to bring in that is going to allow me to also paint this in the correct colors, right? So I'm going to add this to styles here. and add it here like that. Right, that changes the style coloring, but I think I'm missing some styles. Let's see. Styles. Let's see. Did I miss something in styles? Styles. Uh, so body, padding, blah, blah. Okay, no, I already have that. Okay, yeah, this probably I'm missing in the styles, the top. And what else? Let's see. Am I missing other things in the styles? Styles. List group, we did that. Body margin, fonts. Okay, we did that. And the top. And so I am surely missing something here. Let's see. Style. Put this at the bottom. Okay. So we're using tables, which we shouldn't. Okay. We shouldn't be using tables. And let's see, tables, body. So we have this div, this outer div, you have UL. So these ULs. This div, this outer, there's the one on the top, and this is UL. And what's going on here? UL, class list group. List group, margin, width. What's going on with the width? Okay. But looks like somebody might be overriding the width. Is it probably my CSS? Maybe my CSS is overriding it. But anyway, let's fix that. Let's fix that. And I'll just make the modules, this list over here, with 100. Okay, so that makes it as wide as it can be. Okay, there we go. Let's refresh. Perfect. Okay. All right. So we have that. Let's take a look at if we are close to what we want. All right. So we have that. We want it to look like that, right? So we have the backgrounds, the left-hand side, right, highlighted with green. Yeah, that's working. Probably want some spacing above this, right? So maybe let's add some spacing. We could just use plain old breaks, or we can add some margins above me. So margins top two, for instance, that would add some spacing, or just some breaks. There you go. Get some spacing there. And then we still have to add some buttons, right? Before this, below, afterwards, some check marks. So let's add some of those decorations. Okay. So for instance, the modules have these check marks for the plus sign, and then this icon for like an ellipses, a vertical ellipses. Whereas the lessons don't have a plus, right? So let's do the lesson control buttons, right? That's going to be a combination of the check mark plus an ellipses that is vertical. Right, so let's implement that. And then we'll bring it in and we'll add it to each one of our learning objectives and all our lessons, right? So let's create that, right? And let's just copy that. We can add it right here. And then we can go in and apply that, right, to each one of the lessons, right? So for instance, if we go back to the modules and you go back to each one of the lessons. So here's a lesson one. We can apply the lesson control button, right? So it applies it here on the right-hand side, right? So it's a very common thing that you use you create a component, right, in React, right, and then you just reuse it wherever you need it. there it is. We can apply it there. We can apply it to each one of these, like that, right? Like that, like that. Okay. And on your own, you can do the one for the modules. Okay. Plus, each lesson has this kind of like double ellipses, right? Like a thumb that you can drag around. And for that, we can use the grip vertical. That's an icon in that you can import, right? So did I import it before? Let's see. I did not. Oh yeah, we did. Here we go. Let's grab that, and that's in the lesson control button. Oh, actually, no, not there. We need it in the right in the module index. Okay, so we'll add it. I'll add it to each one of the lessons, and also in the we can add it to each one of the modules. But we need to import. So import this. Let's import that. So let's import. There we go. Oops. Yes, grip vertical. That's fine. There it is. Okay, there it is. The icon applied, and then you can apply it to each one of the lessons like that. So to add it, at the beginning of each one of the lessons. Okay, like that. All right, excellent. So what about home? So home, it's basically just what? It's just a combination um, of the modules, right, combined with this course status. So this walks you through implementing the course status, the buttons, right, each one of them, and then combining it with the home, combining it with the modules, right, so that you can implement the home. And so, and also replace the table, right, so that it uses flex instead, right? And so, and this is what should cause us to expand and take up the whole width, right? So for instance, we can go to the implementation of the home index, right? And instead of using these ugly tables, right? Instead of using these tables, right, we're going to surround this with some divs with flex, right? And close that, and then we're going to open this block in the core status, like that, because we want it to disappear for the medium-sized screen, like that. There we go. Okay, so if we go to home, right, normally would show the core status. Wait, do we have the core status? Here is the core status. Why are you not showing? Huh? Okay, you can fix that. All right. And finally, there's a new screen that we've added. That's it's going to represent this the list of people that are associated to the course, right? This it's an array that lists all the TAs, all the faculty, all the students, right, that are associated to the course. That uses just a plain Bootstrap table, right? That is iterates, alternates the color of each one of the rows, right, and has links to each one of the students, right, their login and whatnot. Okay. All right. All right. That's all I have for you today. Let's take a really short break, and when we come back, we'll do office hours. Okay. All right. Be right back. Hi. Can you hear me? Who wants to go first? Let's do some office hours. Anybody need help with the assignment or want to discuss projects, or if you have something private, we can jump into a separate room. You find you need help, Christina? It says somebody's asking, is it always preferred to use percentages for CSS property values like width or height? Well, it depends. If you needed to change as you adapt to different screen sizes, yes. But in some cases, like we have here, the sidebars are fixed width. They don't change as a resize. So you can have a combination of certain items be um, certain elements be fixed, and other ones, allow other ones to adapt to the screen sizes. Tejas or Tejas, you need help? Jeannie, Anurag?
I ask question about the um assessment, like the um rubric, because the in the instruction is like the active link must be white background with the red text. But could I share my screen so you can see that?
Just a minute, let me turn it on. Go ahead.
Sure. It's still share. You are still
Oh,
sharing.
let me stop sharing. Go ahead.
Sure. Um. So this part says a select link must have the white background with red text, but actually I do not know how to do, because in the course and the instruction we not really learn how to like switch
Oh, you
the
mean that
color.
it
Yeah,
switches?
because
Click it?
I
Oh no, we
active the
can't do that
course
yet. We can't do that yet.
and we can do that. Yeah, so I
No,
just
we need JavaScript for that.
all right, cool.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
do that next
that's
week.
all I ask him, because I'm really struggling to do the color thing
Yeah,
that
no,
I can
we
see.
can't do that just yet. Next week we'll
Yeah, I
learn how
see.
to do that.
I see. Thank
Sure,
you.
sure.
Professor, I have a follow-up question on the same thing.
Yeah.
So I see that you have used a bit of JavaScript in the in Lab 2
Yes.
for the tabs. So looking at that, I used a bit of JavaScript for those two navigation bars. Would that be fine for the assessment?
I mean, sure. It's not required, and next week we're going to learn how to use a React Router DOM to dynamically style things based on within React.js. So we're not going to use JavaScript per se, but we're going to embed logic inside of the classes, right, and be able to apply or not apply classes based on some logic. So we're gonna you can keep your logic as long as it works fine. I mean, we're not gonna go in and check to
Hmm.
see the way you did it. But next week we're gonna show how to use React.js to do that.
Got that. So yeah, in that case, my doubts are cleared. Thanks,
Yeah,
Professor.
sure.
Have a good night.
Good night.